Well, hello and welcome to your Wealth, the show that unpacks key economic trends shaping Zimbabwe's business landscape. I'm your host, Kuzafil Muchenjekwa. Tonight, we tackle a critical question. Are informal businesses more successful than formalized traditional businesses? I'm pretty sure this is a question that a lot of people have been asking. Now, with lower startup costs, fewer regulations, of course, and flexible operations, many believe the informal sector is thriving while formal businesses struggle. Now, but is this really the case? And what does this mean for economic growth, employment, and local empowerment? Now, to break all this down in the studio, I'm joined by, of course, my friend Shepard, who's going to be helping us, unpack all of these questions that I have highlighted to you. Welcome back, Shepard.
Thank you.
Awesome. Now, let's get straight into it, Shepard. Is it true that informal businesses are more successful than formal businesses? I'm pretty sure this putting you on the spotlight here.
It's a good question that you've asked, Kuzi. Mm-hmm. So let's break it down. Under normal circumstances, big corporates, formalized businesses are supposed to be flourishing and doing better than informal businesses. Why? Because your informal businesses are supposed to be constituted of mainly startups, people who have had an idea, they've conceptualized it, they've crystallized it, but they want to see it growing. So that is supposed to be the case. But not only that, the informal sector should be a pool from which big corporates are harvested. Mature business ideas progress and graduate into big corporates. But to answer your question, are they more successful than formal businesses? You'll find that there's always a very thin line and distinction, besides, of course, revenue, that differentiates the two. The positive things that comes with informal sectors, they are very agile. They're quick to make decisions. So there's got to be that careful navigation in terms of what is it that you can do or benefit from being informal. What is it that you benefit from being very formal? As I've said, big corporates struggle with the agility. And informal businesses, they don't struggle when it comes to agility. And agility makes business make more money. Because business decisions are made quick. There's no bureaucracy, no bottlenecks, no red tape, which unfortunately is associated with big corporates. Interesting. Now, that being said, you mentioned something which is very interesting to say. The informal business is a pool of businesses which are on their way, to becoming mature businesses, growing into the formal sector. Now, let's just hold that thought for a minute as I get into this question. Then I'll marry it to another question that I have for you later on in the program. Now, my second question to you is, who is behind informal businesses, and what sort of men or women are behind informal businesses? Kudzi, there's been a misconception. We need to deconstruct, decongest, and dissect this particular notion. Contrary to the view that we've had, where people think it's constituted by illiterate, financially illiterate people, people who have got nothing to do, the opposite in most cases is very true. The informal sector, in most cases, is comprised and constituted by people who may have felt frustrated in the corporate world, where they had brilliant ideas, innovative ideas. But because of our system at the moment, where our corporate boards, executive management doesn't change, is not as dynamic and accommodating as it should be. You can imagine somebody who has got brilliant, innovative, and entrepreneurial ideas having to work for an organization for such a long time, denied the opportunity to demonstrate and showcase their capability and capacity. Obviously, when they're frustrated, they get to a point of saying, why can't I leave and go out and try it out there? So, to answer your question, it's actually constituted by men and women who have got talent, who have got entrepreneurial skills, who even have got the capacity to do environmental business scan and be proactive. That's why you would see most of informal businesses are run by people who I would say streetwise smart, but they would have been frustrated in the formal sector where decisions take forever to be made. And they're seeing opportunities to make money going by. So it's not true that it's constituted by people who are not learned. It's not true that it's constituted by people who lack managerial capacity and skills. To the contrary, it's actually constituted by people who even know how to take advantage and manipulate some of the policies that are there. Because as I've said, natural progression would mean you only get to start a business in the industry, sector, and field that you're familiar
with. Oh, interesting. So we're saying that these people are not just people with no experience, but they are people who actually have vast of it, and they know the ins and outs of these big corporates. They know the weaknesses. So now they're trying to implement in a way that they feel flexible and they're not restricted in.
Actually, most of the people who are running informal sectors are people who felt stifled, who felt they were never granted or given enough leg room, enough latitude to showcase their talent and capabilities in the formal sector.
Now, my next question is do you think there are less regulations when we look at informal businesses rather than the formal businesses?
Kudzi, we've talked about people who've got talent. People have been exposed. And some of them, they even know the loopholes. So government regulation sometimes it's reactive. It's not proactive.
Right.
So it's being made sometimes to police, as the word says.
Right. Let me cut you short on that. Shepi. We'll continue in the next segment, explaining on these regulations that are there, between the informal and the formal business. So thank you very much for explaining, the difference between informal, who is behind it, and stuff like that. So thank you very much. Well, our viewers, will be back shortly with the second segment where we'll be focusing on the regulations that are found in the informal and also in the formal sector. So do stand by. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back, viewers. We are still talking about informal sector and formal sector, the regulations that are there, and we'll just continue with our conversation with Shepard as he was enlightening us on these regulations that are there now. Shepi, I'll allow you to continue, with our conversation.
Okay. So what I was saying is, contrary to the view that is constituted of people who are financially illiterate, people who are not entrepreneurial, it's actually constituted of people who have had enormous experience, exposure in the corporate world. Some of them have been frustrated by holding positions in the corporate world for so long. And under normal circumstances, government policy and regulatory framework should actually create a conducive environment for businesses to thrive. But in some cases, some of the policies have got to come in and rein in on rampant practices. So, as I've said, it's constituted of people who are intelligent, people who have got capacity, people who have got skills. So the regulations sometimes tend to be reactive instead of being proactive. Hence, most people then would think it's constituted of people who are always evading policy and regulatory framework. But actually, it's constituted of smart people, street smart people.
Street smart people. Yeah. Now, some have argued that, the informal sector's initial capital requirements are minimal. Now, hence, the success is compared, to the formal businesses. What is your view on that?
My view is it takes more than money to run a business, you would realize that some of the successful business people are entrepreneurial by nature, are people who have the capacity to put together a team, get results through people. And when you're looking at a business, financial resources is just one of the critical elements of running a business. There are times when all that is required is innovation. All that is required is the capacity to identify talent. There are businesses that may not require a huge initial capital outlay. All they require is somebody who's got network, somebody who's got the skill, and some of these service sectors require just service, not goods. So the argument that it's an industry or a sector that does not require too much capital, I don't necessarily agree with that. And to prove my point, if you look at traditional old corporates, they can easily walk into a bank and get a facility. But these informal sectors, nobody is willing to take a risk on them, yet they've thrived.
Right.
So the argument of money is not always the case. It takes far much more than money for one to run a successful business.
Interesting. I've just thought of something, Shepard. Let's talk about investors for a minute. The reason that most informal business do not get investors, is it because they're not formalized?
Interestingly, yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, in the sense that if you are an investor, if you are going to buy into a company or invest into it, what are you buying? You are buying potential. You are buying cash flow. You are buying goodwill. So if you are going to take a risk on an informal guy, there's got to be clear performance indicators. That's where the issue to do with the informal sector, is it running financial accounts? Does it have things that you can look at, projections? Because half the time you've got to look at existing financial records to project whether the business is going to make money or not. Unfortunately, in instances where that decision-making information is not there, it's difficult for any investor to take a risk.
Okay.
Because as an investor, you've got to mitigate the risk. You've got to have something that you can look at and say, I would invest because in the past years, it has demonstrated that it can make me money.
All right.
But the other way to look at it is also to say it should come as an encouragement to informal businesses that if they are going to grow their businesses, they've got to formalize such that those that may be interested in taking up equity in their business, they've got something to look at. And it becomes naturally an attraction, a benchmark, an indicator of potential that exists in a business.
All right. So does a person owning an informal business, as small as it is, it's just a startup, do I need to formalize for me to actually feel like, I'm part of the business community, or I can give myself time to grow as I'm in the informal sector? Is it something like a prerequisite that I just have to formalize?
The way we should look at it is, what is the objective when one is opening an informal business? It varies for different people. For others, they've lost employment and they would want that to provide employment. For others, it's playing a bigger role in the national economy, where you also get to contribute towards creating employment, contribution towards economic growth. But the natural thing should be, just like a normal human being, you've got to start growing, you've got to grow and become an adult one day. So an informal business should eventually one day graduate to a bigger business. Why? It's because it will contribute more towards employment creation.
All
It will also become a better corporate citizen when it comes to contribution in terms of GDP, economic growth, and contribution towards taxes and all these other things.
All right. Well, thank you very much for giving that response. Well, thank you very much, viewers, for coming through to our second segment. We'll be back shortly with the final and third segment. Well, welcome back, viewers, to our final segment of Your Wealth. And today we're just talking about the informal sector and the formal sector to see the things that guide them and some of the regulations that are involved in both of the sectors. Now, Shepard, we were just talking about, informal sector business growing into the formal business. This is something that you also mentioned, that it's a large pool where, once you feel like you've matured enough as a small business, you then graduate, into a formal business. You talked about, you just don't start by running. You always have to crawl, grow and stuff like that. Now, my question to you is, how many businesses have graduated from being informal business to formal businesses?
Because you ask a very interesting question. For information, through Forbes magazine, it has been noted that available statistics indicate that most of informal businesses don't go beyond 24 months, the first 2 years. Almost 90% do not graduate beyond 2 years. So, but again, it also says of those that graduate past the 2-year mark, 65% don't go up to 10 years. So, but why am I bringing in these statistics? There's a lot that is involved when one is running a business. Apart from being entrepreneurial, we've also mentioned that for others, there is comfort in just being employed. Others are running small businesses that just affords them a living. But others are running a business that intends to make a contribution towards economic growth, towards the national employment creation. But again, I've also mentioned about the business cycle, where we're saying it goes through various stages. And these various stages require different input and effort. A startup requires more effort, one putting on different hats. You've got to be a marketer, you've got to be the one who is doing production and services. Growth, your turnover, sales, and profitability has increased. Now, the third level, now we're talking about contraction level, where, yes, the business is making money. It's breaking even. It's just doing enough. The last stage, which is the final one, the decline or renewal stage, is the critical stage, because for some, it just goes one way, decline. It then calls upon your entrepreneurial skills, innovation, diversification. So it's not every business that will graduate into a big corporate. And it takes and calls on both the business person, but also the capacity to invest in hiring a team, a competent team. You will realize, Kudzi, that we've got other people who are very good startups, but they're not good finishers.
Oh, interesting. Now, moving on to my next question, Shepard. What role does taxation play in the success or failure of informal businesses compared to formal businesses?
Kudzi, you've asked a very important question. Why I say important question is because before we can even focus on the informal sector, if you look at running businesses, Zimbabwe is known for excessive or too much taxation. You would realize that for most corporates, 20% of their overheads are related to tax issues. Is that the best that one would expect? I believe government can do better. But apart from that, Kudzi, we have had instances where corporates and companies have had to go through judicial management. And some of these corporates which have gone through judicial management, amongst some of their key creditors has been Zimra. And in some instances, you would realize that Zimra may even refuse to grant a tax clearance to a company which is under corporate rescue. Yet the objective of corporate rescue is to rescue that particular company.
Yeah.
If you ask me, there is need for a review when it comes to taxation regime that we have, but also there is need for a goodwill. If a company is under corporate rescue, the aim is to revive it and give it a second new lease of life. But if it's going to close, even the regulatory authority has lost out.
Yeah.
So to answer your question on taxation of the informal sector, you can imagine if taxation is that excessive on formal businesses, it may be one of the reasons why a lot of informal sector businesses are shying away from being formalized, because then they will be faced with these excessive laws. So government can do better, if you ask me.
You were talking about employment. Some of these startups or informal businesses contributing to the employment of the country. Now, what impact do informal businesses have on employment rates, and do they provide sustainable job opportunities?
In as much as we can talk about 65% GDP contribution from informal sector, it naturally follows that a lot of people actually are employed in the informal sector. But having said that, a lot of things would now come into play. We're talking about most of these informal sectors failing to go beyond the 2-year mark. So naturally, it follows that in as much as one may secure employment in that informal sector, it may not be permanent, it may not last long. But for those that have managed to go beyond 5 years, 10 years, they have made a huge impact when it comes to alleviating and helping with unemployment. But again, if you then look at the statistics to do with unemployment, one of the major challenges that we have faced is most of the people who are employed in the informal sector are deemed to be unemployed because of the unavailability of the statistics when it comes to measurement of these benchmarks. But to answer your question, the informal sector has significantly contributed towards employment.
Well, thank you very much, Shepard, for coming through and shedding more light on the difference between informal sector and formal sector and the things that are associated with the two sectors. I think we managed to grasp a lot in regards to those facts. Thank you very much for coming through.
It's a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, viewers, for joining us right here on Your Wealth. It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much, and see you next time.